Hello and welcome to the OAuth 2.0 Introduction module. In this module, we're going to give you an overview of OAuth concepts and the grant types. We'll cover the details of each grant type in a later module. Let's cover some of the key terminology first for OAuth. The resource owner is the person that owns access to a protected resource. The resource server is a protected server that accepts access tokens. For example, you are the resource owner of your Google Plus account, the resource server. The client is the application that is attempting to access the protected resource server. For example, your music player, a client application, is trying to post your playlist to your Google Plus account. The last row is the authorization server, which issues access tokens to clients after successfully authenticating the resource owner. The main idea behind OAuth 2.0 is to allow a resource owner to grant a client access to resources without sharing the resource owner's credentials. This works by using a client ID and secret, which are used to authenticate a client. The client ID and secret are exchanged for access tokens, and they grant a client access to a resource server. They have an expiry time to prevent unauthorized access if the token is stolen. Sometimes tokens are limited in scope, which means that the token can only access a few resources. OAuth defines 4 grant types to handle various use cases, and we'll cover each of them in detail in later modules. OAuth also requires TLS to protect the client ID, the secret, and the access tokens. The way an application obtains an access token is for it to send its client ID and secret to the authorization server. It can optionally include the resource owner's credentials, and it may also include the scope of the access token. Once all of the necessary parameters are included in the request, then the authorization server returns an access token along with the refresh token, depending on the grant type. A request to refresh an access token follows a similar pattern. The client should provide the client ID and secret, the refresh token, and the token scopes. Then an access token will be returned to the client. Let's cover an access token's scopes and why they're used. Scopes identify what a client is allowed to access. For example, assume that we have a read scope that grants read-only access to the photos resource. Then assume that there's an update scope that grants access to read as well as update the photos resource. Scopes are configured in the Apigee product in the Allowed OAuth Scope section. Now, the OAuth specification allows an app to not include a scope on the request. If you decide to do this, then you should either assign a default scope or reject the request with an error message that states that the scope is required. Now let's cover the 4 OAuth grant types and their use cases. The first one is the client credentials grant type. Use this grant type for server-to-server communication and only when that server is a trusted client. The next one is the resource owner password credentials grant type. Use this if the client application can be trusted with the resource owner's credentials. Next is the authorization code grant. Use this grant with confidential clients. The last one is the implicit grant type. This grant type is typically used for untrusted browser-based applications, and it's similar to the authorization code grant. But instead of returning an authorization code, it returns the access token directly to the client. This one is easier to implement in browser-based applications. Now, you create these grant types in an OAuth proxy deployed to Apigee Edge. This proxy will typically support one or more of these grant types. Client applications will interact with the OAuth proxy to generate access tokens. This concludes the OAuth introduction module. If you have any questions, please post them on our community and review our documentation for more details. Thanks for watching.